The heat hung over Redstone auction yard like a silent warning. The kind of dry, suffocating heat that made tempers rise and patience crack. Wind swept through the rusted fence lines, lifting pale gold dust that danced in slow, spiraling columns before falling again, blanketing the wooden rails and boots with a thin layer of grit. Maeve Delaney stood with one hand gripping the railing, the other shielding her eyes beneath the brim of her hat. The auction grounds were restless today, not loud, just agitated. And she'd been doing this long enough to know it wasn't the heat that made people uneasy. It was the horse. They were bringing him out now. Ashbourne. A stallion so still he looked carved from bronze. Muscles rippled under a dark copper coat that shimmered like heat on asphalt. His mane had been left unbraided, wild and uneven, but his eyes, that was what stopped people mid-conversation. They were too calm. Too old. Like they'd seen things you couldn't unsee. Maeve had read the bloodline. She'd approved the paperwork. Nothing in the documents explained that look. That unsettling, quiet gravity the stallion carried as two handlers led him across the auction ring. One slipped. The stallion didn't twitch. Didn't flinch. Just walked like he already knew the ground. Maeve narrowed her eyes. He's too composed, she muttered under her breath. Like he's not just here to be bought. Like he's here for something else. Crowd noise simmered low, wealthy ranchers in tailored denim and polished boots, brokers with tablets, breeders sniffing bloodlines. Cameras clicked, murmurs rose. Ashbourne didn't seem to notice. Or care. That's when she saw him. A man near the back, half in shadow, standing still as the fence post beside him. Dust clung to his coat, the collar frayed. His hat looked older than the ring itself. He didn't move. Didn't speak. But his posture was wrong for a buyer. He wasn't watching the horse like an investment. He was watching like a man trying not to breathe too loud. Rowan Dusk. Maeve felt her heart catch in her chest. She hadn't seen him in 20 years. Not since the fire. Not since solstice. But there he was, older, thinner, like time had hollowed him out and left the edges raw. Most people wouldn't even recognize him now. Maybe that's why he came. Maybe he didn't want to be seen. She turned back to the ring just in time to see Blake Mercer swagger onto the dirt path. His shirt was white as salt, untouched by dust. Diamond cufflinks glinted in the sun, and his smile looked engineered in a boardroom. Money followed him like a stench. Maeve's stomach knotted. She knew men like Blake. They bought horses like they bought cars, for show, for vanity, never for soul. He stopped next to Ashbourne, who stood like a statue. "Would you look at this show pony?" Blake laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like he came straight out of a catalog." Some in the crowd chuckled. Others stayed quiet. Then he did it. A short, sharp slap across Ashbourne's neck. Not enough to injure, but enough to humiliate. The sound cracked like a whip through the ring. Silence followed. Sharp, complete. Ashbourne didn't rear. Didn't buck. He just turned his head slowly, deliberately. Maeve held her breath. But Ashbourne didn't look at Blake. He looked past him. His gaze cut through the heat, through the silence, and found one man, Rowan. The stallion stared, eyes unblinking, nostrils flared just slightly. Like he'd scented something only he could recognize. Rowan hadn't moved. But Maeve saw his jaw tighten. His hands clenched the brim of his hat. Ashbourne's ears didn't flicker. His tail didn't swish. It wasn't the stare of an animal startled. It was something else. Recognition. Calculation. Maybe even remembrance. Maeve whispered, not to anyone in particular. "That's not instinct. That's memory. Time seemed to splinter. Maeve's mind flooded with fragments, ashes in the wind, hooves pounding in firelight, a young man crumbling to his knees in the rain beside a burned stall. No. It can't be. She looked at Ashbourne again, then at Rowan. Two souls locked in a gaze that wasn't new. Just unfinished. Blake Mercer let out a forced chuckle. What? Horse can't take a joke? Nobody laughed. Even the wind stopped moving. And for the first time in years, Maeve felt something stir deep in her chest. Something old. Something forgotten. Something waking up. The moment Ashbourne's gaze met Rowan Dusk's across the ring, something ancient cracked loose in Maeve Delaney's chest. She didn't know what it was yet, a memory, maybe, or a suspicion that never truly died, but it spread through her like slow fire. The crowd resumed murmuring, the tension broken by Blake Mercer's forced laugh, but Maeve barely heard it. Her eyes were locked on Rowan, who hadn't flinched, hadn't blinked. His hands were still curled tight around the brim of his old hat, his knuckles pale. He looked like a man staring at a ghost. Maeve sat alone in the dusty back office later that evening, the glow of a single desk lamp casting long shadows across outdated filing cabinets. The window was cracked open, letting in the dry night air, thick with sagebrush and the echoes of a crowd long gone. She had pulled the stallion's file again. Ashbourne. It was an immaculate report. Too immaculate. The breeder was listed as Stone Ridge Equine Facility, West Colorado. She'd never heard of it. No contact number. No real address. Just a P.O. box. Maeve typed the name into the state registry. Nothing. Not under breeding, not under veterinary license, not under livestock tax records. Her fingers moved faster, urgency replacing fatigue. She cross-checked with the Federal Equine Registry. Still nothing. No breeder, no dam, late registration, she muttered. This isn't an oversight. This is intentional. She flipped to Ashbourne's registration date. It was marked nearly a year after the stallion's estimated foaling. Unusual. Unprofessional. Unless. Her breath caught. 20 years ago, Maeve was an assistant trainer at Silverbrush Stables, a modest ranch with a national reputation, thanks to one man, Rowan Dusk. He wasn't just good with horses. He was different. He didn't command. He listened. Horses responded to him with a reverence that bordered on eerie. Especially Solstice Flame. A jet-black mare with a silver blaze and a fire that no one but Rowan could touch. She was impossible, untamable, and breathtaking. Maeve had seen stallions buckle under her charge. But with Rowan, she became something else, almost human in the way she followed his voice. People came from 3 states away just to watch him ride her. Not for spectacle. For connection. Then came the storm. A freak lightning strike. A fire. Panic. Maeve remembered the smell first. Then the screaming. Solstice was inside. So was Rowan. When they dragged him out, burned and bloodied, she remembered the way he fought the medics. He kept screaming her name. Solstice. Solstice. She remembered the thud of his knees hitting the mud. How he refused to leave the ruins. How he sat there, rain pouring over his shoulders, cradling the blackened halter in his hands as if it were a child. She never saw him again after the funeral. He vanished. Rumors said he'd sold everything. Left the state. Some said he drank himself into the mountains. Others said he became a ghost that wandered horse auctions without ever buying. But Maeve had always known that if Rowan ever showed up again, truly showed up, it wouldn't be for a deal. It would be for a reckoning. She flipped back to Ashbourne's photo. That coat. That build. That stare. Too many things matched. The sloping shoulders. The flared nostrils. The way he planted his front legs when assessing strangers. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was lineage. She dug deeper. Cross-referenced the stallion's blood type against archived data from Silverbrush. She still had old vet copies saved on a thumb drive. Rowan had once shared them with her in the early days, when Solstice was still young and the world hadn't yet turned cruel. She opened the file. Blood type AE+. Same as Solstice. That wasn't enough for proof. But it was a thread. She kept pulling. Back in the paper file, she checked the damn section. Blank. It just said, private record on file. Breeder request. Bullshit, Maeve whispered. This wasn't a private breeder. This was a cover-up. The stallion had been transferred twice. Once within Colorado, once across state lines into New Mexico. Each transfer redacted the previous owner. That kind of maneuvering didn't happen with normal horses. Unless someone was trying to bury a trail. She sat back, heart racing. What kind of foal is registered a year late, with no dam, from a breeder that doesn't exist, and ends up here, locking eyes with a man who hasn't touched a horse in 20 years? Maeve closed the file and leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Rowan hadn't spoken a word at the auction. He hadn't needed to. But Ashbourne had. With his eyes. With that unshakable stare. That wasn't a look you learned. That was a look you inherited. Maeve whispered to the empty room, voice low, reverent, afraid. Whatever this is, it didn't come here by chance. She looked at the window, where the last of the desert twilight faded into indigo. And anything hidden this well was never meant to stay hidden forever. The next morning, Maeve drove through the Mesa Plains with the stallion's file tucked beneath her arm and something heavier pressing on her chest, dread. The documents she'd uncovered weren't just irregularities. They were fragments of a deeper lie. One that had crossed state lines, registry loopholes, and 2 decades of silence. And she had only one name left to follow. Nathan Granger. She hadn't seen him in 15 years. Back then, he was a quiet, brilliant horseman working under Rowan at Silverbrush, Rowan's second in command. But unlike Rowan, Nathan had always been calculated, private, driven by precision more than feeling. Now, he was the official representative of the now-defunct Stone Ridge breeding operation, the same ghost entity that had placed Ashbourne on the circuit. He was staying in town for the auction's final day, and Maeve found him at the edge of the fairgrounds, drinking bad motel coffee from a styrofoam cup. Maeve Delaney, he said without surprise as she approached. I figured you'd come. You figured right. Nathan looked older, leaner. His hair was grayer, but his posture still carried the weight of command. His eyes as though those had dulled. The kind of dull that came from carrying something too long. I'm not here for pleasantries, Maeve said, handing him the folder. I found the gaps. The breeder, the damn records, the transfer trail. All of it reeks. And I know exactly whose past we're standing in. Nathan didn't open the file. He didn't need to. He stared out over the paddocks, the wind tugging at his coat, and said, almost to himself, I told myself I was protecting him. Rowan? Maeve asked. Nathan nodded. And maybe I was. At first. But it wasn't just that. He gestured for her to follow, and they walked to a bench tucked behind the stables. From here, you could see Ashbourne, tied loosely to a post, his muscles relaxed, his eyes half-lidded. He looked unbothered. But Maeve knew better. Nathan sat heavily. The night of the fire. I wasn't supposed to be there. But I came back after the trucks had gone. I couldn't sleep. Something didn't sit right. He paused, jaw clenched. There was this sound. Like hooves, but soft. Like something too small to be a full-grown horse. I found him, Ashbourne, wedged under a collapsed beam in the back of the foaling barn. Burned, barely breathing. But alive. Maeve froze. You knew. I wrapped him in a blanket and drove him straight to an old friend in Colorado. A breeder who owed me favors and didn't ask questions. I told them to hide his lineage. No names, no connections. I sent money, paperwork, vaccinations, feed. I did everything except tell Rowan. Why? Her voice cracked. Why wouldn't you tell him his mare's foal had survived? Nathan's hands shook slightly. He rubbed them together like he was trying to wash something off. Because Rowan wasn't Rowan anymore. Not after the fire. He blamed himself. Stopped eating. Stopped talking. He didn't even fight back when they forced him to sell the land. And me. He swallowed hard. I was jealous. Always was. Of how the horses looked at him. Of how Solstice moved for him and not for anyone else. Maeve was silent. The confession hung in the air like smoke. So you buried the truth. I buried it under good intentions. But it was still burial. She looked at him long and hard. You don't get to decide when the truth resurfaces, Nathan. It's here now. And it's looking him in the eye. He finally opened the file, stared at the redacted entries, the impossible gaps. He's going to know, Maeve said softly. If he doesn't already. I think he knew the second Ashbourne looked at him. Back at the auction house, tension coiled tighter by the hour. By noon, Blake Mercer had filed an official petition with the Redstone Board, claiming legal ownership of Ashbourne under Section 7 of the Equine Transfer and Purchase Agreement. The contract, according to Blake, had been executed cleanly, despite the questions Maeve had raised about lineage. Doesn't matter, Blake told a circle of reporters. The horse is mine. Paperwork's clean. He goes to my ranch in Utah by sundown tomorrow. Maeve stared at the copy of the court-stamped document and felt her stomach drop. Blake had money. Lawyers. Influence. And now, a 24-hour window to make the transfer legally binding. Once Ashbourne was off Redstone property, there would be no coming back. She stormed into the board's meeting room, file in hand, voice low but sharp. You're going to let a horse walk into a private facility with redacted lineage, no verifiable dam, and an active dispute pending? Chairman Reeve, a gray-haired man with half a spine left in him, sighed. Maeve, we can't stop a registered owner from taking possession of their horse unless there's evidence of fraud, abuse, or endangerment. She slammed the file down. Then look harder. This is more than a sale gone sour. This is a stolen legacy. Behind her, a familiar voice broke the tension. She's right. Rowan Dusk stepped into the room, hat in hand, shoulders squared. Every head turned. I don't want the horse for myself, Rowan said. I want the truth made public. That's all. Chairman Reeve narrowed his eyes. You have proof? Not yet. But I have memories. I have the fire report. I have the burn scar on the underside of that horse's flank where the branding would have gone. And I have eyes. Anyone who knew Solstice would see it. Another board member leaned forward. Without DNA, this is all speculation. Maeve's voice hardened. Then we have to act fast. We have less than 24 hours. Outside, the late afternoon sun threw long shadows across the paddock. Maeve and Rowan stood side by side, watching Ashbourne graze. He's not afraid of you, she said. He remembers. Do you? Rowan didn't answer at first. Then, softly, every night. Maeve turned toward him. Then it's time to stop running from it. He nodded once. Let's get him tested. Maeve already had the DNA kits ready, 2 samples, one from Ashbourne's mane, one from an old halter fragment that still held Solstice's follicles, kept preserved in a sealed envelope she'd never found the heart to throw away. They rushed the samples to the county lab, pushing emergency status. 24 hours wasn't enough for official results, but even a preliminary match might stall Blake's order. Might. That night, as the wind howled through the fences and the sky turned indigo, Maeve stood outside Ashbourne's stall, her fingers laced through the bars. Inside, he stood alert but still, eyes on her. You can't speak for yourself, she whispered. But you already did, didn't you? She closed her eyes. He had spoken. With that look. With that step. With that refusal to be anyone's prize. Rowan joined her in the silence. They'll take him tomorrow, Maeve said. Not if we make them see. How? Rowan placed a steady hand on the stall door. By letting him choose. Publicly. Let the whole damn auction house watch. Maeve turned to him, eyes wide. You want to let him loose? Not wild. Just free enough to speak. She hesitated. If he doesn't come to you, then he's not mine. And I'll walk away. Maeve nodded slowly. But if he does, Rowan said, voice tightening, then maybe this isn't just a reckoning. Maybe it's a return. She didn't speak again. Neither did he. The only sound was the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a door creaking open like the beginning of something that could not be undone. The air over Redstone was different that morning. Not hotter, not colder. Just still. Heavy. As if something was waiting to happen but hadn't yet decided how. Maeve Delaney was already at the stables before dawn. Sleep had been a stranger, her body restless, her mind echoing with Rowan's words. Let him speak. She didn't know what haunted her more, the idea that the stallion might come, or that he might not. Ashbourne had remained calm through the night. He hadn't kicked, hadn't paced, hadn't shied from the handlers. He stood there, quietly. Too quietly. Like he was remembering something no one could see. Maeve stepped into the old equipment barn at the far end of the property. It hadn't been touched in years. Dust lay thick on the wooden crates and forgotten tack, shafts of sunlight slanting through the cracked slats of the siding. She pulled back a tarp. Beneath it, in a box labeled Rowan/Solstice, do not discard, she found what she didn't even realize she'd been looking for. A horseshoe. But not just any shoe. Worn, scorched at the edges. But still whole. And on the outer curve, barely visible under layers of oxidation, were 2 small letters carved in hand. SF. Maeve lifted it with both hands. It was heavier than it looked. She remembered it now. It had hung above Solstice's stall. Rowan had always said she didn't need luck, she was the storm itself, but Maeve knew it was his way of honoring her strength. A totem. A promise. This wasn't a relic. This was an echo. She carried it out slowly, cradled like a relic. Her boots struck the dirt with purpose. The morning sun stretched long across the paddocks, and the air seemed to hush around her. Ashbourne saw her the moment she stepped into the open. He didn't move. Not yet. Maeve walked to the corral fence and hung the horseshoe gently on the old nail Rowan himself had driven into the post decades earlier. It fit perfectly. Like it had never left. Then she stepped back. Ashbourne blinked. His head lifted slightly. Ears pricked forward. Then he stepped forward. Not a gallop. Not a trot. Just one step. Then another. His eyes locked on the shoe. Not Maeve. Not Rowan. Not the handlers. Just that single, rusted memory. And when he reached it, he didn't snort. Didn't paw. He lowered his head. Slowly. Reverently. And touched it. The tip of his muzzle pressed against the iron curve like it was something sacred. Rowan, standing several feet away, clenched his jaw. His hands, which had once gripped reins through fire and thunder, now curled into trembling fists at his sides. His chest rose sharply. Then froze. Because that wasn't training. That wasn't behavior. That was memory. Passed not in words, not in blood work, but in something older than both. Maeve's voice came in a whisper, only loud enough for the moment. He remembers her. 2 hours later, the auction yard was packed. Every seat taken. Every foot of fence lined. Cell phones out. Whispered speculations swirled like flies. At the center stood Blake Mercer, sharp-suited and smug, arms crossed like he'd already won. To his left, 2 of his attorneys stood stiffly. Behind him, his personal transport trailer waited, ready to haul Ashbourne out and into the curated captivity of Mercer's private ranch. To the right stood Maeve and Rowan. She held a folder. He held nothing but breath. Chairman Reeve cleared his throat and stepped forward. We've gathered here under urgent petition. Mr. Mercer claims full ownership of stallion registration hashtag at 3871, named Ashbourne, and has filed for immediate transfer under state and national equine regulations. He looked toward Maeve. You've challenged that claim? Maeve nodded once, crisp. Yes. On grounds of falsified lineage, withheld identity, and suppressed genetic history. Reeve exhaled. Do you have evidence? Maeve opened the folder. Preliminary DNA analysis conducted within the past 24 hours shows a 67% parentage probability between Ashbourne and a known sample from Solstice Flame, a mare presumed deceased in the 2005 Silverbrush fire. Gasps rose from the crowd. Maeve continued, further verification is pending. But more importantly, she paused, looking at Rowan, we don't believe this case should be decided solely on paperwork. Blake scoffed audibly. So now we're letting horses fill out affidavits? Maeve didn't flinch. Rowan, she said quietly. Rowan stepped forward, his voice low, but even. You want documents. Fine. But I want something else. He turned to Chairman Reeve. I want the horse to decide. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Blake shook his head. This is absurd. You're going to make a multi-million-dollar decision based on where a horse walks. Rowan turned to him. No. Based on who he walks to. Silence. Chairman Reeve blinked. You're serious. As serious as the fire that killed his mother. Reeve hesitated, then nodded. Very well. We'll witness the release. Let the horse move of his own accord. The gates to the corral opened slowly. Ashbourne stood just inside. No lead rope. No halter. No cue. The handlers stepped back. Everyone watching held their breath. This wasn't a performance. This was testimony. Ashbourne stood for a long moment. His head high. Ears still. Muscles relaxed, but attentive. Then, he looked to the left, where Blake stood. And then to the right, where Rowan stood, unmoving. And then, without sound, he turned. And walked. 1 step. 2. 3. He crossed the entire ring in silence. And stopped in front of Rowan. He didn't rear. Didn't whinny. He just lowered his massive head, inch by inch. And rested his brow against Rowan's chest. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't gasp. They didn't move. Because something sacred had just happened. Not trained. Not commanded. Chosen. Rowan's breath shuddered out of him. One trembling hand rose, hesitant, afraid, and came to rest on Ashbourne's neck. For the first time in 20 years, Rowan Dusk touched the blood of Solstice Flame. And Ashbourne stood still, eyes closed. Not for dominance, but for home. Blake Mercer turned and walked out without a word. The attorneys followed. The trailer stayed empty. No one tried to stop them. They were already forgotten. Later that evening, Maeve stood beside the old fence post, staring at the horseshoe. The iron shimmered faintly in the dusk light. Ashbourne stood nearby, grazing lazily, his tail flicking without care. Rowan approached slowly, his eyes softer now. Less haunted. Maeve didn't turn to him. She just said, "That wasn't a behavior." Rowan nodded. No. It was a memory. Inherited. Chosen. They stood in silence for a long moment. The kind of silence that doesn't ache, but heals. Then Maeve added, almost as if speaking to herself, "That wasn't just a horse finding a man. That was a legacy asking to be seen." The silence after Ashbourne chose him had been sacred. A silence of reverence, not confusion. Of truth acknowledged. But the silence didn't last. Blake Mercer wasn't the kind of man to walk away cleanly. He spun on his heel, fists clenched, boots grinding dust as he stormed back toward the center of the ring, voice rising like venom. "This is a joke," he shouted. "A damned circus trick." Gasps rippled through the crowd. He pointed a trembling hand at Chairman Reeve, then jabbed the air toward Rowan. "This man, this relic, is trying to steal what I legally purchased. I have contracts, registrations, transport papers. And I swear to God, if any of you ignore that because a horse walked a few damn steps." Rowan turned to face him fully. The stallion still stood beside him, head slightly bowed, eyes calm. Unmoving. But Rowan stepped away from him now, just far enough to break physical contact. His boots creaked as he ascended the three-step platform that had served as the auctioneer's stand for decades. He turned to the crowd. To everyone. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried like thunder. If what you want is muscle and movement, there are plenty of horses behind these fences. Beautiful. Strong. Fast. If what you want is pedigree, you'll find names and papers cleaner than this one's. He paused. But if what you want is something more. His eyes swept across them all, ranchers, trainers, spectators, recorders. Then to Blake Mercer, who stood rigid, jaw tight. If you want a soul that survived fire, abandonment, and silence, if you want a living being who remembers not just what he is, but who he came from, then he's already chosen. He didn't raise his voice. But no one dared interrupt. That's not training. That's not bond. That's blood, returning to what it was torn from. And all the contracts in the world can't overwrite that. Rowan stepped down slowly. Ashbourne was still there. Waiting. Not tethered. Not commanded. Just waiting. Chairman Reeve cleared his throat, eyes darting between his clipboard and the tension in the air. A second round of results from the state lab has arrived, he announced, voice shaky. Maeve stepped forward and handed him the sealed envelope. Reeve broke the seal, unfolded the single page, and took a breath. Parentage probability exceeds 99.3%. Confirmed maternal match, Solstice Flame. The murmur was instant. Not loud, but collective. Blake turned pale. His words failed him. For the first time, he had no script. Nathan Granger stepped forward then. Quietly. He wasn't holding anything. No papers. No defense. His voice came low, rough from too many years of holding back. I knew, he said. Since the night of the fire. Eyes turned. I found the foal. Ashbourne. Still alive. Barely. I took him. Hid him. I told myself it was for Rowan's protection, but he looked at the dirt. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid he wouldn't forgive me. Afraid I'd never measure up to what that mare saw in him. Rowan didn't flinch. Nathan swallowed hard. I took something sacred, and I buried it in red tape. He turned to Rowan. But I kept him safe. I made sure no harm ever came to him, even if I didn't have the courage to bring him back. Rowan said nothing. But in his silence, there was something louder than forgiveness. Acceptance. Nathan stepped back. Then paused. I relinquish all claim. Effective immediately. Blake Mercer tried one last time. He approached Chairman Reeve with fire in his eyes, shouting, "You can't ignore legal precedent. You can't let emotion override law. This is still theft. I will sue this board to the ground." Reeve, to his credit, didn't flinch. "No, Mr. Mercer. You purchased a name. A tag. But you never earned the trust. Or the truth." He held up the DNA confirmation. "This board recognizes Ashbourne as a direct descendant of Solstice Flame, and thus the rightful legacy of Rowan Dusk's former stable. All prior claims are now nullified based on material concealment of genetic origin." Blake's mouth moved. But no words came. He turned. Walked. Shoulders stiff with fury and shame. No one followed. Outside the arena, the air felt different. Cooler. Maeve stood next to Rowan again, both of them facing the open paddocks beyond the fence line. Ashbourne stood freely now, no ropes, no handlers. Just watching the horizon like it meant something. "He doesn't need a pasture," Maeve said. "He needs a place that remembers." Rowan gave the faintest smile. "Then we take him back." "To where?" Rowan looked toward the hills. "To the place where the fire started. Where she last stood." Maeve nodded. "Where it ended for her. And began again for him." The drive into the hills was quiet. The trailer rattled softly behind the old truck, its tires humming against the gravel backroad like a lullaby long forgotten. Dust rose in slow spirals as the wind shifted across the valley, carrying with it the scent of juniper and wild sage. Rowan hadn't been here in 2 decades. Not since the fire. Not since he'd walked away from everything he couldn't bear to remember. Now, Ashbourne stood in the trailer behind him, calm, alert. Not pacing. Just waiting. As if he, too, knew this wasn't just a return, it was a reckoning. The gates came into view first. The wooden arch, once proud and clean, was now gray from years of sun and silence. The hand-carved sign still hung by rusted chains, Silverbrush Hollow. Rowan brought the truck to a slow stop. The keys clicked from the ignition, but he didn't move at first. His hand stayed on the wheel. Fingers tense. Eyes locked on the past. Maeve, in the passenger seat, turned gently toward him. "You don't have to go in alone." Rowan exhaled. "I do. But thank you for being here." He stepped out, boots crunching over gravel. When he opened the trailer gate, Ashbourne didn't rush out. He stepped down slowly. Deliberately. Hooves silent on the earth, as if he knew this ground remembered. Rowan led him forward, no rope, no reins. Just presence. The wooden gate, once burned and boarded, now stood partially open. Rowan reached out, ran his fingers along the top rail. He remembered hammering it shut the day after the fire. With shaking hands. With tears no one had seen. Now, he pulled it open. The hinges creaked. Not defiantly. Not in protest. But like something once frozen, finally moving again. Ashbourne stepped past him, ears forward. He didn't gallop. At first. He sniffed the air. Took in the curve of the pasture. The outline of the old training fence. The row of oak trees she used to run beside. Then he moved. Light. Fast. Effortless. Not like a young stallion showing off. But like something returning to a rhythm it was born knowing. Maeve leaned against the fence, watching him move. Rowan stood beside her, silent. Then she spoke, voice low and even. Not all wounds need healing. Some just need to be seen and allowed to exist. He nodded, eyes glistening. I spent years trying not to feel. Trying not to remember. But maybe some memories don't want to be buried. Maybe they just want to come home. Ashbourne kicked once in the air and landed in a soft trot near the far end of the field, circling back, tail high. In that motion, Rowan saw her. Solstice. For the first time, not as a ghost, but as a legacy that never really left. They spent the night clearing the barn. Dust covered everything, but the bones were still strong. Maeve helped carry in fresh hay while Rowan refastened the old door hinges. There was no ceremony. Only quiet work. Purposeful. Meaningful. When the last nail was hammered and the final beam set, Rowan brought the old horseshoe from the truck. The one Maeve had found. The one with SF carved on its curve. He didn't say anything. He just climbed the ladder to the entrance beam and nailed it back where it had always belonged, above the stall she had once claimed. Then he stepped down. Maeve handed him the small plank of which she'd carved that morning, soft cedar, sanded by hand. He nailed it gently beside the shoe. 4 words, burned into the wood. Where she stopped. He began again. The next morning, the valley woke early. Mist clung to the low grass like breath held too long. Birds stirred, cautious, as if unsure the world had earned this new day. Rowan stood at the edge of the fence, cup of coffee cooling in his hand. Ashbourne stood in the center of the pasture, nose to the wind. Not restless. Just awake. Rowan didn't speak. He didn't need to. The stallion turned slowly and looked at him. Not with questions, but with recognition. Rowan lifted a hand. Ashbourne took a step forward. And that was enough. There are wounds that time doesn't erase. But sometimes, healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering, fully, painfully, and still choosing to keep going. This isn't a story about a horse who chose a man. It's about a man who learned to become worthy of being chosen. And about a life that burned, returned, and refused to remain invisible. Because some souls don't seek to be saved. They just want to be seen. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever carried a silence that was too heavy to name, then maybe, like Rowan, you understand. We don't always need answers. Sometimes, we just need to open the gate again. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you've remembered. What you've carried. What you've reclaimed. If you believe that some lives choose to come back, not to beg, but to be seen, then hit like, share this story, and subscribe to our channel. So you don't miss the next journey. About the imperfect, the wild, the almost forgotten, but never unloved.